Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spagnola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we've been having interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life, broadcasting since 2014. I'm your host, Carmen Spagnola, joining you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, recently known as Victoria, BC, Canada. Some of you may remember when I launched my Intro to Tarot course back in 2017. Well, I retired it last year, intending to update it because so many decks have been released in the last 5 years, and I just felt like it needed to be refreshed. It was a comparative tarot course, meaning we looked at the classic Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and then we compared it to several decks released in the postmodern period from the 1980s to today. And what I've realized is it is impossible to keep up with the internet. Even from just like 5 or 6 years ago, if there was a deck that was trending, it kind of seemed like everybody was watching that deck. But now there's so many sort of subcultures and micro communities. I don't ever really feel like there's one thing that kind of takes over and captures the imagination when it comes to decks. It's like very kind of community and group based. Anyway, a comparative tarot course, I think, probably is best as like an Instagram account, which I just don't have time for. And it actually seems like a lot of the deck review accounts that I followed over the years, they also don't have time to keep up with it either. Like a lot of those accounts are not as active as they were a few years ago. There's definitely tons happening on TikTok around tarot, which I do love, but I mean, there's lots we could say about TikTok, but TikTok is such a specific For You feed, like the For You page. That feed is so specifically tuned to you that even if you follow someone, you don't really get all their content, even if you're really engaging with it. It just doesn't work that way. It's just a different platform from Instagram. So even though tarot is definitely part of my daily life and I incorporate it into my planetary magic most days, I personally just have so many interests, and I don't feel that I can devote as much time to teaching the tarot as it actually deserves. Right now, my teaching is definitely focused on my facilitation trainings. So like if you've ever been with me in space, like either online or in person, you know then that I weave attachment, somatics, polyvagal theory, and anti-oppression into every session. Just like the stuff we talk about on the podcast, that kind of stuff comes up in every session that I lead. And in 2024, this year I've really been like pulling the curtain back and breaking down the principles and techniques behind my work and how I hold space, how I facilitate. So that's what I've been doing in those trainings. They're open to anyone who's holding space for groups or who wants to convene groups, and anyone who wants to do that in an attachment-oriented, justice-oriented, somatically based, trauma-sensitive, neuro-affirming, anti-oppressive way. A few spots are actually still available for the Tuesday cohort. This is kind of what always happens. People have been on a wait list for a long time. I open it up and then things change or they play musical chairs. So I'm still taking applications for the next little while, probably end on September 15th. But that Tuesday cohort I know has some spots. We start in October. We meet Tuesdays 12 to 2 Pacific, goes for 2 months. So if you're interested, you should totally apply, now at carmenspagnola.com. Anyway, back to tarot. I wish I could just teach the tarot. I wish I could be just so focused just on that because it's so important. It's such a important part of cultural literacy and spiritual literacy, I think. And I often talk about how, oracle card decks are like poetry and tarot card decks are like literature. And if you know, you know. I get more into that into the course, but okay, I got to focus here. Back to the tarot. I'm not going to just repost the old course in the Numinous Network. I took it down. It feels like a gap. I still feel like I want to update it because like 7 years of daily card draws later, there's just always still more to learn and more to see in your relationship with tarot. So it wouldn't be enough for me to just like re-offer the same old course. That said, I would be remiss if I didn't include tarot in my teaching in some capacity and in the spirituality courses kind of area of the Numinous Network. It does feel like there's been this hole there for this past year. So I am revisiting the material from Intro to Tarot. I'm reteaching it, but in live sessions over the next several months inside the Numinous Network, my monthly membership site. So each month this fall, I'm going over a line of the major arcana, following Rachel Pollack's iconic framework for the 3 lines of the majors. If you don't know Rachel Pollack, she's just an absolutely phenomenally influential spiritual thinker and writer. She's a vanguard trans woman in the spirituality scene. She wrote a book called 78 Degrees of Wisdom, amongst several others too. She wrote like science fiction and many other things. Anyway, she has this framework around how to read the major arcanas that I just think is, well, many people think has like changed the trajectory and quite revolutionary in the history of tarot. Very important. Anyway, so we're going to do the 3 lines month by month. We just did the first line, September, going to continue in October, November. Then in early 2025, we're going to continue with deep dives into the 4 suits. And then finally, we'll do the court cards and creating your own spreads. And we'll kind of do a deep dive into the Celtic cross spread as a reflection of psychological state. But as I was going through that archived material, I was like, there is still really good stuff in here. There's like still some really good stuff in the original course. So I was listening to it recently and I included it in this month's enrichment class. But I also wanted to share it with the world because I was listening thinking like, this is so interesting. This is interesting history. It had been 7 years since I actually recorded these MP3 sections of the course. And I was like, this should just be public on the podcast because it's really good, especially if you're like a history buff or if you like period dramas. Like there's just so much to offer with the history of the tarot. It's just this sprawling epic story of how the tarot came to be. So here's one of those archival pieces. Without further ado, this is from the original Intro to Tarot course. And it's about the arcane origins and the mythology of the tarot. Hi there, and welcome to Intro to Tarot with me, Carmen Spagnola. This course is designed to give you a theoretical understanding of the tarot so that you can put any deck to practical use, no matter what kind of artwork there is, and regardless of whether or not it comes with a very good in-depth guidebook. By understanding the principles behind the tarot, and then learning the techniques of interpretation, you can develop a tarot practice that will give you a lifetime of meaningful material for your personal discovery and development. At the end of this course, you'll be thoroughly prepared for working with any deck, and you'll be well positioned if you want to go on to become a professional reader or to incorporate the tarot into your current professional healing, therapeutic, or coaching practice. So to lay a proper foundation for understanding the symbolic messages that, let's be frank, are often quite hidden within the tarot, we need to begin way back in about 2700 BCE with a character called Hermes Trismegistus. Now, the tarot doesn't originate with Hermes Trismegistus. It comes much later than his story begins. But during the 19th century, tarot deck creators incorporated and amplified the symbolism that points to Hermes Trismegistus and his work, which is known as the Corpus Hermeticum. And then these become the secret symbols that connect the tarot to Freemasonry and the secret societies of the occult period, which is really when tarot flourished in more of a mass or mainstream kind of way. Eventually, it started with these secret societies then came to North America and began being circulated and more widely distributed as these secret societies were recruiting. So since then, many tarot deck creators have perpetuated and evolved these symbols. And it would seem oftentimes quite unwittingly. Sometimes the symbols don't really make sense the way they're used in the modern way. So tarot can seem confusing and contradictory and sometimes like downright intimidating. And if you've ever felt that way, it's not your fault. In this course, we'll walk through it step by step. So let's go back to Hermes Trismegistus. So he's a mysterious character, and he might actually be more accurately described as an avatar. Hermes refers to the Greek god of magic and writing and free movement between the realms of man and God. And he's also called Trismegistus, which refers to thrice great or triple hero. And we can hear the echoes here of the Trinity. Now, Hermes Trismegistus isn't really a guy who lived and breathed and walked the earth. He's more like a syncretic representation, meaning a combination of many religions, combining the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, which many people also called Thoth. So Hellenic Greece and Egypt recognized Hermes and Thoth as equivalent. Both were gods of writing, both were gods of magic, and psychopomp, which is the role of guiding souls to the land of the dead. Hermes Trismegistus is also mentioned in the Islamic tradition in the Quran, where he's called by the name Idris. So Idris, Hermes, and Thoth are kind of blended into this avatar. Now, there's an Arabic body of work called the Jabirian corpus, and it contains the oldest documented source for the Emerald Tablet. The Emerald Tablet is a preeminent and enduring feature of the mythology surrounding the Corpus Hermeticus because it's the first piece, the first physical document we have that is signed Hermes Trismegistus. So there was this Hermetic revival during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and in this time, the contents of the Corpus Hermeticum carried a great deal of prestige, especially with scientists and theologians. Science and theology, religion, were still quite enmeshed with each other at that time. So the Corpus Hermeticum is associated with alchemy and magic, astrology, and geomancy. So Hermes Trismegistus, his work, drew the attention of people like Sir Isaac Newton and Paracelsus, who was this Swiss alchemist. He had made like the first sort of clinical scientific mention of the concept of the unconscious. So there's all of these renowned thinkers and scholars who are looking to the Corpus Hermeticum, meaning the body of work written by Hermes Trismegistus, as original documents of thought. This is where alchemy basically comes from. Just as an aside, two paths start to take shape in the study and application of the Corpus Hermeticum. One path is philosophical and includes studies like tarot, astrology, numerology. All of those things are very influenced by the Corpus Hermeticum. And the other path is that of practical magic, like spells and rituals. And so through these various modalities, the Corpus Hermeticum has influenced countless syncretic traditions. Again, that's the blending of multiple religions. And that would include like theosophy and Wicca, chaos magic, thelema, spiritualism, neo-paganism, and of course, sort of straight ahead Hermeticism. Now, during the Renaissance, also later on, originally it was thought that Hermes Trismegistus was a contemporary of Moses. But then a scholar during the Renaissance named Casaubon actually dated the Corpus Hermeticum using the emerald tablet. And he dated it to about 200 to 300 AD. So it wasn't nearly as old as many people believed. And its later provenance is kind of partly indicated because there's aspects of later wisdom in it, like Greek philosophy and Platonism, like the works of Plato, and Stoicism, like capital S, the Stoic philosophers, and also later Jewish and Persian influences. So this was knowledge not discovered until the 3rd century. So Casaubon said this couldn't possibly be ancient because some of these concepts are only fairly newly discovered. Now, these days we recognize that the contents probably predate the 3rd century because the writings are sort of a codification of an earlier oral tradition. So it's probably earlier, but we don't know how much older. So what do we make of this? How can all of these writings of Hermes Trismegistus be happening later? Well, it's likely that some of the magi, in other words, the magicians who were living in those ancient times, kind of around 2700 BCE, started, like their legacy started to kind of get bound up with Hermes Trismegistus, as though they were either descendants or doing work in his lineage. So, for instance, Imhotep, he is sort of the first polymath, meaning a polymath is like a genius in multiple areas. So he's the first polymath in Egypt. He was the high priest of Heliopolis, which is pretty much like modern day Cairo is built up over top of this ancient city. So he was known as an architect, a doctor, an engineer, and a priest. Interestingly, I find it interesting, Imhotep is associated with one of the first sleep temples. So, you'd be sick, either physically or spiritually. You'd go to his temple, a priestess would stay up with you all night long and interpret your dreams for you to help give you a medicine. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's kind of cool. Anyway, so Imhotep is highly revered, and his legacies, because he's a magician, start to get swept up in the lore of Hermes Trismegistus, because of course they were worshiping Thoth and Hermes and Idris at that time. So it's kind of like they were part of the lineage of these deities, and they start to kind of get wrapped up in that. And then, of course, the association with Moses is because the 3 wise men, the 3 magi, in other words, the 3 magicians, the astrologers and mathematicians who go to Bethlehem following the star to see Jesus, recognize that this is an important seminal moment in history. And this is where so much of the Gnostic Christ imagery that we find associated with Hermes Trismegistus comes in. So it's kind of like you have to look at history at different times and how things are starting to evolve, develop, and also in some ways kind of get distorted, where gods and men start to become interwoven, and all of this stuff gets co-opted in the 19th century by, pretty average dudes wanting to create these very special secret societies. Through this work and through the influence of these secret societies, they then influence the tarot that we all know and love and use today. So we'll examine more of the influence of Hermes Trismegistus, especially when we get into the major arcana. But for now, I'd like to read for you Newton's translation of the Emerald Tablet, which becomes really sort of the sacred text, you might almost say, of the alchemy movement
And actually, this is found among his papers that are currently archived at King's College Library at Cambridge University in the UK. "'Tis true without error, certain and most true. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracles of one only thing. And as all things have been and arose from one, by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing, by adaptation. The sun is its father, the moon is its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth is its nurse. The Father of all perfection in the whole world is here. Its force or power is entire if it be converted into earth. Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly with great industry. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth and receives the force of things superior and inferior. By this means you shall have the glory of the whole world, and thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. Its force is above all force, for it vanquishes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. So was the world created. From this are and do come admirable adaptations, whereof the means or process is here in this. Hence I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having the 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world. That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended." So, although that's archaic language to the modern ear, you can probably hear in there that he's talking about the elemental dignities, the 4 Western elements of earth, air, fire, water. He's talking about taking the tangible and connecting with the intangible, and taking the intangible and making it materialized. He's talking about manifestation. So really, it's an entire world view that we can also see as really informed a lot of the occult and therefore New Age movements around manifestation, magic, intention, and wholeness. So I'm excited to share all of the little signs and breadcrumbs that have been left that point to this philosophy as we take the journey of tarot together.
Okay, if you liked this short mini episode, there's another one to come. The second half of this little tarot mini series will be published just a few days from now, and it will be about the spread of tarot decks around the world from the Renaissance to the postmodern period, which we're currently in. It's also just a short piece, right? Probably my favorite little bit in this introduction to tarot. But I think it's so important for actually interpreting your decks. As I said, there's been a proliferation of decks in the last 5, maybe 10 years with self-publishing, and it's been so fast and so big, so quick. And so I think it's really important to recognize the difference between a classical deck and a postmodern deck, because many people pick up a postmodern deck and don't really get it, or they memorize the guidebook for that deck, and then when they pick up a different deck, they're getting totally different instructions for what to do with, like, an 8 of Swords, for instance, than they did. So there's just not a lot of consistency because they're not working off the Rider-Waite-Smith. Anyway, listen to it. It's like a 14 or 15-minute episode. It's coming out in a few days. Quick before we go, though, listener shout out. I have to say, I recently sifted through reviews from different countries than Canada and America, which I just somehow missed. I was amazed that there were all these reviews I'd never seen before. So this one comes from Tropical Mystic in Australia. I'm sorry I missed you. She wrote this amazing testimonial. The title is Fierce, Inspiring, and Life-Changing. This podcast has been an integral piece of my growth as a woman and as a conscious woman. Carmen is warm, strong, and fierce in her mind. Her storytelling abilities have echoed to me through many mornings, and I adore listening to the way she weaves into cultures with curiosity. If you want a world of spirituality that isn't submitting to light and love, the Numinous Podcast is exactly where you should be. Please listen in. Thank you, Tropical Mystic. And I am totally with you. Yeah. We're not in the quote unquote light and love crowd. If you don't know that reference, it means basically a superficial white lady spirituality that spiritually bypasses the tough stuff in life and sort of sidesteps the difficulties and just wants to focus on like ascension and light and love. And of course, if you're a listener here, that's not what we're doing here. I super appreciate you naming that, Tropical Mystic, and thanks for the appreciation you gave me in the review. If you want to leave me a voice note or written feedback, you can also do that at castfeedback.com/Numinous Podcast, and I'll link to that in the show notes. Okay, finally, so this month, September 2024, as we always do in September, it seems, in the Numinous Network, we continue our proactive healing work by having an SSP reset. So SSP, what is that? It stands for the Safe and Sound Protocol. It's a music listening program developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, the polyvagal theory guy. And it's this music listening program to help support your nervous system in social engagement. It was originally developed to support autistic folks, but over the years, the trauma recovery community has been using it for all kinds of nervous system support. And so it's a complementary therapy. It's not standalone, meaning it's not going to do that much if you're like just going through the program on its own without support from like a therapist, a therapeutic provider, or a community, in a group setting, community of peers. It's not like a magic wand or a silver bullet that way. And of course, nothing is for trauma recovery. But it's a really useful component within an ecosystem of support. I think it's useful because it's passive. It's so ironic to think about like the people who struggle with social engagement, people who get easily overwhelmed when trying to like function in the world. Anytime you have to interact or engage, so many of our therapies actually put a ton of pressure on that social engagement nervous system. Like we have to like talk about it and we have to be like one-on-one. It's like we're under the microscope, right? So this is nice because it doesn't have to involve a lot of talking. You don't have to share your history or revisit your trauma. And so it works on your ventral vagal branch of the nervous system, the social engagement part of your nervous system, but without requiring a ton of actual social engagement, which can really exhaust people with sensitive nervous systems. So you're just listening to specially filtered music, but you're doing it in a larger context of safeness and co-regulation. So when you join the Numinous Network, you're kind of automatically in that larger context of a supportive structure, a supportive container, lots of opportunity to access co-regulation in a way that works for you. But then we also have a course inside the network that you can work through in your own time, kind of walks you through all of the information and research about how to use the SSP, what it's doing. And then we have these live co-listening sessions. So it's like a small group of people all listening to their own preferred playlist of the filtered music, but we're like doing it together. We're all together in a collective container doing our own independent thing. It's like that introverts of the world unite on your own, inside your own houses kind of thing. It's like that. Anyway, so we give that focus pretty much every September. We kind of like go, okay, everybody, let's all do the SSP here in the network as part of our somatic reset for fall. It's just knowing like how tricky the winter is for so many people, whether it's because you experience seasonal affective disorder or because of COVID, you're going to be more isolated. There's not as many outdoors activities, or the holiday season can be really hectic, especially this year with how the American election just like pulls focus so strongly like across the globe. And of course, also in October, it's the genocide of the anniversary, of the genocide in Gaza. So there's just stuff we can anticipate is coming up that's going to be like a really challenging period. And the SSP isn't a good intervention to start when you're like in the midst of the shit, right? It's something you do when things are like relatively manageable, to give you like a strong somatic foundation for tough times ahead. So you don't do it if you're like sick or like in a super stressful crisis or something. You take a break and you pause at that time. So this is just a good thing we can do ahead of the hectic season. It's like a nice, responsible thing we can do to like make it easier on ourselves and potentially our other householders, like people we live with, in the months ahead. Because it doesn't work overnight, right? You got to put in a little bit of time ahead of time. You can listen in as little as like 5 minutes a day, but you want to do it ahead of your hectic time. We have a motto in our house. It's like a short little phrase, a little bit at a time at the right time. It's like a useful mantra to remember for gardening or farming or for parenting and relationship work, for collapse prep, for trauma recovery, because these things are not actually complicated, even though they can get overwhelming. They're not complicated. They just require our attention. And they don't even require all of our attention all of the time. In fact, that wouldn't be good for us. That would just burn us out, right? What we need to do is give them some attention a little bit at a time at the right time. You know, like weeding the garden isn't so bad if you just do it a little bit at a time at the right time. And the right time is not after things are all like overgrown, right? The right time is early in the process. So if you want to join us in the network for that, we'd love to have you. And it's probably like the most cost-effective way to experience the SSP, because usually you have to pay for a bunch of one-on-one sessions with a provider just to gain access to this program. But with membership in the Numinous Network, we've created this whole ecosystem of support at a really affordable, or like I say really, but it's relatively affordable. It's a pay-what-you-can rate. But you could potentially get like 3 months of access to the SSP for the price of like one provider session. So that's what I mean by like, it's relatively affordable. Anyway, you can find out more about the Numinous Network at carmenspagnola.com. I super hope we'll see you there this fall. And come back for the second half of this Intro to Tarot episode. And I'll connect with you then. Until next time, take care.